The late afternoon sun bathed the quiet suburban street in a warm amber glow. It was the kind of idyllic scene you might find on the cover of a real estate brochure. A peaceful neighborhood lined with well-manicured lawns and neatly painted homes. But for Ethan Lawson, the serenity was a cruel illusion. He knew something was wrong the moment he turned onto his driveway. His mother, Karen Lawson, stood on the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if holding her world together by sheer willpower. Even from behind the windshield of his old Ford, Ethan could see the devastation in her eyes. Her face, usually calm and kind, was frozen, caught somewhere between disbelief and helplessness. Ethan parked hastily, the gravel crunching under his tires. His gut churned. Slamming the car door shut, he strode up the path. "Mom? What's going on?" Karen didn't answer. Instead, she gave a slight shake of her head, as if waking from a nightmare. But her hands trembled where they clutched her sweater, and her eyes flickered toward the garage. It was then Ethan saw them. Several individuals in official-looking vests worked with mechanical efficiency. They hauled boxes from shelves, dragged storage bins across the concrete floor, and dumped his family's belongings into a large metal dumpster parked at the curb. The blood drained from his face. His exhaustion from a long day at work evaporated, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. He stormed forward. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the workers flinched but said nothing. Instead, a tall figure emerged from the chaos, striding toward Ethan with measured, deliberate steps. His gray hair was cut short and neat, his features sharp and cold, and he wore the smug expression of a man who had never known consequences. "Mr. Lawson," the man greeted him with mock civility. "We're enforcing community standards." Ethan recognized him instantly. Gregory Miles, the president of the HOA. The man wielded his position like a king presiding over his court. Untouchable, arrogant, ruthless. Standards? Ethan spat the word like a curse. What standards justify tearing through my family's belongings? Gregory's lips curled in something that might have passed for a smile. "We issued warnings. Multiple notices regarding noncompliance. Your garage was cluttered, violating HOA regulations regarding exterior storage. We are within our rights." Ethan turned to his mother, looking for confirmation. Her eyes welled with tears, but she said nothing, only clutching herself tighter. He could see it now, her silent devastation, the helplessness that had frozen her to the porch. "This isn't a cleanup," Ethan said, voice low and dangerous. "It's a raid." And then he saw it. At the far end of the driveway, a metal-burned barrel glowed with orange embers. Smoke coiled into the air. His steps faltered as his gaze locked on the flame-licked remnants inside. Something dark and charged shifted in the heat. His mind scrambled to understand what he was seeing. Then it hit him. Patches. Military patches. His father's rank insignia. And then, clear as day through the smoke, the faded stitching of a name. Lawson. No. His father's uniform. Gone. Ethan's body moved on instinct, shoving past one of the workers. "Stop," he shouted, but it was too late. The fabric curled and blackened before his eyes. The rank insignia is disintegrated. The chest patch, Lawson, vanished in a flurry of ash. A sickening wave of nausea surged through him. This wasn't just any uniform. It was his father's. Major Thomas Lawson's. A man who had served 3 tours, decorated for bravery, a man who came home scarred but proud. His mother had folded that uniform carefully after his death and preserved it like sacred relics. And now it was nothing but smoke and ashes. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. His vision tunneled. He turned, slowly, toward Gregory Miles. The man stood with his arms crossed, watching the uniform burn with an air of detached amusement. And then Ethan saw it, a faint smirk at the corner of Gregory's mouth. The rage came then, wild and consuming. "You'll pay for this," Ethan said, his voice low but charged with a terrifying promise. Gregory Miles only chuckled. "Good luck with that." And with that, he turned away, walking off like a man who believed he was beyond consequences. But Ethan Lawson wasn't going to let this stand. A spark becomes a blaze. The house smelled of smoke. Even hours later, it clung to the curtains, to Ethan's clothes, to his skin. Sitting at the kitchen table, his mother had her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, staring blankly at nothing. Ethan stood over his phone, fingers hovering. He'd always believed in diplomacy, in resolving conflict through discussion. But this wasn't a conflict. It was an attack, and it was time to fight back. His thumbs flew over the screen. Today, our HOA burned my father's military uniform. Major Thomas Lawson served this country with honor through 3 combat deployments. He was awarded for valor. His uniform was a symbol of sacrifice, of service. And Gregory Miles, president of our HOA, decided it was offensive, so they burned it. No apologies. No remorse. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is disrespect. This is wrong. Veterans, military families, anyone who believes in honoring our heroes, please help me make this right. He hit post, expecting a few shares, maybe a supportive message from an old friend. What happened next shocked him. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Then thousands. Veteran groups reposted it. Military families added their stories. Active duty soldiers, retired generals, people from all over the country called for justice. Local reporters picked it up first, then national news outlets. Within days, the HOA's social media pages were under siege. Their website crashed from the flood of traffic. Sponsors cut ties. Local businesses refused to work with them. But the real turning point came when Ethan received a message that changed everything. The military attorney. It was late. His mother had long since gone to bed. Ethan was scrolling through hundreds of messages when he saw the name. Colonel Richard Harmon, Ret, military attorney. The message was simple. Ethan, I serve with your father. What they did is illegal. If you want to fight this, I can help. Ethan's throat tightened. He took a deep breath, then typed back. Tell me what to do. Within days, Colonel Harmon had filed a lawsuit. It was a legal declaration of war. The charges? Destruction of government property. Desecration of military memorabilia. Emotional distress. Property rights violations. And they didn't file quietly. They went public. Ethan and Harmon appeared on news broadcasts. Veterans rallied. Protesters stood outside HOA headquarters, demanding Gregory Miles resign. The once untouchable leader of the HOA was suddenly a pariah. Frankly, Ethan couldn't believe it. But justice was catching up. The courtroom battle. The day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Veterans in uniform. Families of soldiers. Men and women with missing limbs standing tall. Silent. Steadfast. Gregory Miles sat at the defendant's table. Gone was the smug arrogance. Sweat slicked his brow. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. When he was called to testify, he stood stiffly. Colonel Harmon questioned him. Calm. Precise. Mr. Miles, Harmon began, did you authorize the removal and destruction of the Lawson family's property? Gregory swallowed. They were in violation of HOA regulations. And did that include Major Thomas Lawson's military uniform? Gregory hesitated. It was part of a larger enforcement. Are you aware, Harmon pressed, that destroying a military uniform is a federal offense under Title 18 of the U.S. Code? The silence was deafening. Gregory floundered. I was following HOA policy. Policy, Harmon said, voice slicing through the air, does not give you the right to dishonor a soldier's sacrifice. The verdict. The judge was a former Marine. His gaze was cold steel. You didn't just burn a piece of cloth, he said. You burned the memory of a man who served his country. And you insulted every veteran who's ever worn the uniform. The gavel came down. Judgment in favor of the Lawson family. Applause erupted. Ethan's mother wept silently beside him. Veterans saluted. And Gregory Miles sat frozen, his empire crumbling around him. Justice at last. The HOA was ordered to pay $350,000 in damages. Their reputation was destroyed. Residents stopped paying dues. More lawsuits followed. Gregory Miles was forced to resign. But it wasn't over. The Department of Veterans Affairs launched a federal investigation. A month later, Gregory Miles was charged with destruction of government property. At sentencing, he was ordered to perform 1 year of community service at a veterans rehabilitation center. Ethan found it ironic, serving the very people he once disrespected. The legacy lives on. One evening, Ethan stood on his porch, the sun setting behind him, casting the neighborhood in golden light. Then he heard it, engines rumbling, a convoy of cars. Veterans stepped out, some young, others old. Some stood tall, others leaned on crutches. But all of them stood together. They gathered on Ethan's lawn, forming a perfect line. And then, in unison, they raised their hands in salute. Colonel Harmon stepped forward, carrying a folded American flag. "We can't replace what was lost," Harmon said, "but we can honor it." Ethan took the flag with trembling hands. He felt its weight, not just in fabric but in meaning. He returned the salute. And in that moment, he knew his father's legacy would never be forgotten. Epilogue: Peace. Months later, Ethan visited his father's grave. He placed the folded flag at its base. "We did it, Dad," he said quietly. The breeze rustled the leaves. The flag remained still, solid, steadfast, like the legacy of Major Thomas Lawson. Untouchable.